One is that I had a speech impediment. And so I would stutter just horribly. I couldn't, the more nervous I would become, the less I could get out at the end of my sentence. By the end of my senior year, I had the #1 show on the #1 station in 3 major markets. At the beginning of the year, I couldn't even talk. I had plenty of friends. I had popularity. I had enough money. I was 19, 20, 21. I had enough money for all that. And there was still this emptiness on the inside of me. That's when I started having this, I think I'm going to sneak to the liquor store on a Monday and get something for tonight. And then I can't wait to get off work so that way tonight I can get home and have a drink. To eventually, I'm going to carry a small flask with me to work to have a drink. But by that time, the screws were so loose on this area of my life concerning alcohol that it wouldn't take hardly anything to start really getting me off course.
Have you ever looked around your life and thought, I have everything that I have ever wanted, but I still feel empty inside? I have plenty of money, I have friends, and I have popularity, but I still feel like there should be something more. Is there something more? What will bring true fulfillment to my life? Maybe you feel you have found fulfillment and everything is going well. Everything except for this little secret that you've been keeping. This secret is a ticking time bomb. You've kept it secret thus far, but it's only a matter of time before someone sees right through you. Is it even really a secret, or do others know about this thing in your life? Is there a way out of this bad habit? Can God bring true fulfillment to your life? Is there something more than health, wealth, and prosperity? These are the questions that I want to explore with our guest today as he shares his life change story with us. I've actually never met our guest in person, and he is zooming in all the way from Ventura, California. So, hey, new friend, why don't you introduce yourself and let the listeners know who you are?
Hey, everybody. My name is Elijah Tindall, and I'm all the way from California, Ventura, California, just north of LA. And I'm a comedian and comedian/slash speaker. And so I talk for a living.
Well, welcome, Elijah. So glad that you're here, and I'm excited to hear your story. So we have listeners that are all over the world, and I've got some listeners from Russia, from Algeria, from Australia, from all over. And so it's really interesting to me to hear where people are from. So why don't you tell us a little bit about where you were born and where you were raised as a child?
I was born in Dallas, Texas. Now, I've never actually lived in Dallas, Texas. I was born there, and then immediately my parents shifted to Little Rock, Arkansas.
Well, Elijah, I knew we had a connection because I'm in Northwest Arkansas, and you were there in Little Rock. So anyway, I knew we had a connection somewhere. Yep. So that's awesome. So why don't you tell me a little bit? Did you have any siblings, or were you the only child?
Sure. Yeah, I had a sibling, and I still do. My sister, my elderly sister, is a year and a half older than me, and she always passed herself off as younger than me, and so we always joke about it. But yeah, I've got one sister, and that was it.
How were things with your mom and dad? Did they stay together the entire time as you grew up, or was there a split? Or tell me about that relationship.
Absolutely. Actually, I'm doing this podcast episode right now from their dining room right now, because we're kind of in transition while everyone's moving around. And so yeah, they literally celebrated their 55th wedding anniversary 2 days ago. So yeah, they were always a good example to me of just, I mean, I don't think I ever experienced a concern about my parents not going to be together. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't a big surprise. It wasn't a big, there was nothing, no reveal that was about to happen. And my dad, if I could grow up, even though I'm 51, if I could grow up to be half the person character that he is, I would be, I'd be ecstatic.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you had a really good relationship with your parents. I know I had a really good one with my parents as well, but I talked to a lot of people on this podcast that just did not have a good relationship. So let me ask you this question, Elijah. Was God in your family at all? Do you remember any God moments growing up? What was it like? Did you guys go to church? Did you not?
Yeah, it's a great question because okay, so when I was small, I would say about 6 years old. My little nana, my little Mexican nana, she would drag me and my sister to these old school revivals that were in the white tents, back in the early '80s, and the white tents with the evangelists coming through, and it was so hot under that tent. It was, this was in Arkansas. This is in Little Rock, Arkansas, and so it was 112 degrees outside, big missionary mosquitoes flying around, and there's a literal air conditioned church building 20 feet from us. And she would drag me to those revivals. That was my exposure to a church culture, to the Christianity, to the belief system. But it wasn't until I was 11 and a half that my dad actually committed his life to Christ. He ended up becoming an associate pastor at a really strict Pentecostal church at the time. And that's where I was actually exposed to Christianity. And then my dad ended up starting his own church over time.
So, what did Elijah think about himself? We talk a lot about identity and who we think we are. And, were you a confident young boy? Did you believe that you were, did you have confidence in the things that you did, or were you insecure? I mean, tell me a little bit about what was going on in your mind.
Yeah, I would say I started out very insecure. And what I mean by that is there was a couple of reasons. One is that I had a speech impediment. And so I would stutter just horribly. I couldn't, the more nervous I would become, the less I could get out the end of my sentence. I would just lock up. But where we were in Arkansas at the time, believe it or not, was not it was not the melting pot of cultural diversity there. And so I was really, I was timid. I was afraid of being bullied and picked on just because I was browner than everybody else, and so people didn't really know what I was. They probably weren't even thinking of it. But you know how our minds play tricks on us, and I was thinking everyone is worried about this, and I was actually the only one. The other thing was my name. My name, I go by Elijah. My actual name is Elias, and I didn't know that until I started school. And when they called roll, they said Elias, and I was like, "Who's this Elias kid?" And I went home, and I said, "They called me something weird at school," and my nana and my mom were like, "Was it Elias? Because that's your name, stupid." Like that's I got in trouble for that. But it was different than I wanted to be. I wanted to be Scott. I wanted to be Todd. I wanted to be John. I wanted to be something that just right in the middle. And so there are several factors that caused me to just really. I was just worried. I looked like Schmeagol from Lord of the Rings. Like I was just a gangly little creature, and I was a type 1 diabetic, which means I would have these medical issues that really, diabetes is such a common thing now in common knowledge, but back then it was not so common especially with a type 1 diabetic. Because there's some variations, there's some differences in the way you treat that. And so if my blood sugar is running low from too much insulin, I would have reactions, and it would scare everybody. And I didn't even want to speak up in class because they would have to do a special thing where they would pull out an apple juice for me and all, and I wanted to be invisible. I did not want to stand out. I didn't want to get nervous. And for all of those reasons, and the enemy uses all of these things to cause us to feel insecure about ourselves. And so I just felt insecure. And it wasn't until I was about 13 that I kind of started stepping out.
So tell me, your dad was a pastor already at that point, correct? So did
Yes.
being a pastor's kid, sometimes the pastor's kids feel like they want to rebel against the way the way their dad or their mom is headed it spiritually. Was that your case, or did you just embrace, your dad's ministry and stuff?
So I was looking, and I wouldn't have said it then, but I can see it now. I was looking for a way to go and do whatever it is that I wanted to do without having rules and regulations or any kind of standards. And so that actually drove me away I ran from God till I was 21.
So what did that look like in high school for you? I mean, did that look like going to parties? Did that look like, dating a lot? I mean, what did that look like in your life?
I would do some partying. My first drink was, at about 12 years old. We paid a guy that we knew to get us a 6-pack, and he dumped it off in this dirt, and it rubbed dirt all over the beers, and that kind of thing, which was very symbolic of what alcohol would end up being in my life. It's something I would have to go through dirty things to get a hold of, and go through, and secretly, and all the nonsense that it became in my life. It was very symbolic. I didn't know at the time. At the time, I was just Schmiegel trying to wipe off a dirty beard.
So let me ask you this question. So you're going through high school and you're kind of doing a normal high school thing, rebelling a little bit, doing your own thing. Where did that lead you after you were out of high school? I'm assuming, did you graduate high school? And if you did you go into the workforce or did you go to college?
So the school counselor called me in on my beginning of my senior year, and he said, "You're not going to be able to graduate if you don't make up these 3 credits. And the only way you can do it is there's a VOTEC course off campus for half a day." And so I chose, on that list of a big list of things, I chose radio broadcasting. Now remember, I have a speech impediment. And so I still, like, even though it's cleared up a little bit, I still get nervous. I thought radio broadcasting meant we were going to push buttons and play music all day. So when I got in there and I realized, oh no, they're training people how to be disc jockeys on the radio. And for those young people listening right now, there used to be a thing called radio, where we would actually listen to it. And so I realized that. But Mr. Bob, who was the teacher in that, he was connected to all the radio stations around, because he ran this radio broadcasting program. So when radio stations would need somebody for just little filler roles, they would contact him and say, "Hey, we got a part-time position for someone to go get coffee for people," that kind of. And so he calls me into his office about 2 weeks into class, and I'm doing the typical cutting up and trying to distract from me being so insecure. And he calls me in and he goes, "Hey, Rock Jock," that's what he called me. He goes, "I think you've got what it takes to be in radio." Anyway, by the middle of that year, there was a radio position that opened up for a part-time gopher, but it was the #1 station in Central Arkansas, which also at that time included the Memphis market and Dallas market. So this was a big station. So I got the job, and about 2 weeks into that, the program director said, "Hey, you go to that broadcasting school. Can you come run the board?" Which means just push the buttons. Tonight, the overnight guy called in. And so this happened 3 nights in a row. And I was like, "Can I talk?" And he's like, "No, you can't talk." And so finally, the third night, he let me talk one time, and I was so ecstatic. I was like, "Oh, here we go." And so I picked the song with the legs at 3:48 a.m. And I opened that mic up, and then I FM 104 KKYK, your #1 hit music station. I was so excited. And it was just like, at that moment, I was like, "Oh, this is what you're meant to do." From that time to this time, I was an insecure stutterer that would not want to stand out talking. But all of a sudden, this little glimpse of, like, you may not have the whole picture, but here's part of the picture, and here's how it's good. So I believe our life is like that. We've got these puzzle pieces that start to present themselves, and they fit with this other piece and this other piece. And then over time, it creates this bigger image of who it is God wants us to project to be his part of the image. And so that's what happened out of high school. And then I went into radio directly. I ended up getting my own radio show on that station by the end of my senior year. I had the #1 show on the #1 station in 3 major markets. At the beginning of the year, I couldn't even talk.
Wow. That's amazing. That must have been quite the ego thing too, to be on the air at senior in high school. So yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was the worst thing in the world for me because now they're sending me to these clubs. I'm too young to be in the club, but I'm doing these Friday Night Live remotes. I'm doing it. And so people are just bringing me whatever I want. And this was back in the late 80s. I graduated in 90s, so late 80s, early 90s, and 90s. And, drugs were just running around. Fentanyl wasn't on the scene yet, all this, And so I just had access to whatever I wanted. I moved out when I was 17. I got my own house, or I was renting a house. And, I was partying it up until I was 21.
So what happened whenever you were 21? Did you stay at that radio station, or did you move on to something else? What happened to you?
The radio station switched formats to a talk radio, which I love now, but back then I wanted to be, the lightning and thunder of the station. And so I quit the radio station. I still did production. I still did commercials and stuff. But what happened in my life, the shift toward not wanting to live that way anymore is that it wasn't one of these traditional rock bottom moments. What it was a I've got everything I wanted. I had plenty of friends. I had popularity. I had enough money. I was 19, 20, 21. I had enough money for all that. And there was still this emptiness on the inside of me because I had been exposed to God and his presence at a young age. I knew there was a difference between what I was feeling on the inside at this age when I thought I got everything I wanted versus what I knew to be true. And my little Mexican Nana was always in the back of my head because I would go home and visit, and she would always scream when I was leaving. She always go, "Son of the Most High God, child of the King." She'd always say that. And my friends were like, "Hey, man, you're not a son." I was like, "Just keep walking, dude. Just keep walking." I didn't want any part of it. But when I was about to turn 21, I just had this conversation with my best friend at the time, and God already had been, dealing with my heart, and I'd already been feeling these feelings. And so I told him, I said, "Listen, man, tomorrow," I said, "I want you to get everyone out of the house, and tomorrow I'm going to church and I'm just making things right." And I said, "You don't have to go with me. You don't have to, and I figured I would never see him again." And I remember it was about my dad's little church in Bauxite, Arkansas. My dad ran kind of a church for homeless people, but it was in Little Rock later on. But it started in Bauxite, Arkansas. And so there we were, and I walked in Easter Sunday. I walked in kind of late, and the songs were going on. Praise and worship was happening, and I didn't wait for an altar call. I didn't. So it wasn't what someone said in a message. It wasn't the song that was playing. It was me knowing that I have to make things different. Without change, nothing changes. And so I didn't wait. I didn't do the traditional waiting till the end. I couldn't wait. I was like, I got to get this thing, and I just walked straight to the front. And so you got to think, my nana's in there, my dad's in there, my family, and in a small church, everyone already knows your story. Everyone knows they're praying for you. Everyone knows your shenanigans that you're up to. And so I just walked straight to the front, and I was just crying, just that ugly cry. And out of the corner of my eye, I see someone. I don't know who it is yet, but I see someone standing beside me. Turns out it was my best friend that I was talking to the night before. He came to church that morning. He walked up with me. He ended up becoming a children's pastor and a youth pastor later on down the road. And so that was the shifting point. It wasn't everything's gone wrong. It's everything went right and something's still wrong.
Yeah. So maybe you felt the emptiness. You were there and you had everything that you thought that you would make you successful or make you, mean something to yourself or from the world standpoint, but you were still empty. Did that lead you into some kind of ministry at that point, or where did you go? So after that happened, did you just continue that path, or what? Tell me about that.
And they were going to go to summer camp that first year, and they needed someone to drive the van. And they said, "Hey, anyone will do it." And I was like, "I'll drive that van." And so I drove the van full of students, and that's where I was exposed to this different level of ministry on I wouldn't say on a greater level, but on a scale that as far as the things being done. So I was exposed to the atmosphere of like, oh, this is, there's 1,000 teenagers in there worshiping God. I'd never seen anything like that. And so that it was just like this it exposed me to more of the style of things that God would lead me to later on. I actually ended up over the next few years actually going to that church, moving to Oklahoma, going to that church. And that's where I ended up becoming a youth pastor for 10 years and then actually running that camp.
Wow. So you actually ran the camp, or that was kind of your job was to do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I did that for a number of years, and until God shifted me into into comedy, in the entertainment industry.
So tell me about that. So that's an interesting jump from leading a camp and then going into being a comedian or into the entertainment business. What led you into that, and was God behind that, or what? I mean, what led you that direction?
And let me clarify, the camp, I ran the camp for 2 years, and then the rest of the time I was a youth pastor at the church. And so after that, the majority of time I was a youth pastor. Yeah, well, I think it has to back up to when I was working there at the ministry, because in there was an important shift that happened in my life. So I mentioned earlier that I had issues and struggles with alcohol. Okay, and but from the time I was a teenager, when I at 21, when I got saved, I never even considered really having a drink or using any substance or anything like that. It wasn't something that I was interested in. While I was working in the ministry, we would have these guests come in from all over the world and stuff, and about when I would say 31, 32 years old, working at the church, we had a praise and worship team come in, and on their request list was some wine. And so I was like, wine, and once again, I'm not here to say whether or not it's good or bad or indifferent for you. I just know, for me, alcohol was certainly a thing I needed to stay away from. History of addiction in my family with my nana and things like that. And so when I saw that, I was like, huh. And so what I did was, I was like, well, if it's okay for these guys, once again, looking for excuses, if it's okay for these guys to do it, well, why wouldn't it be okay for me to do? And so then I started casually, socially drinking while I was actually working in ministry. And it wasn't necessarily frowned upon, because some of the biggest names out there were doing it as they were coming in, and openly doing it, in our green rooms and stuff at the church. And
yeah. So was this while you were working at the camp then? So you were a camp director, or you were leading this camp, and so you can kind of nail this down to whenever you had some guests or had people there, and they were ordering wine. Is that accurate? Okay, and so I'm curious, because you mentioned to me earlier that you did some partying in high school and some that kind of stuff. So did you not recognize that alcohol was an issue then, or was it not an issue then? And then, I mean, what happened there?
I would say there was no cravings, if that makes sense. There was no cravings that came along with it for continued use. It was just, I'm going to party because we have the stuff here, but there was nothing in me that was drawing me toward that any more than it was drawing me toward anything else that I wasn't struggling with necessarily. But that was introduced when it was reintroduced into my life in my 30s. That's when I started having this, I think I'm going to sneak to the liquor store on a Monday and get something for tonight. And then I can't wait to get off work, so that way tonight I can get home and have a drink. To eventually, I'm going to carry a small flask with me to work to have a drink. And eventually it did become this, wait a minute, things are becoming unmanageable. They're getting off course, they're getting off track. Money is disappearing where it doesn't need to disappear. All these signs of addiction, these are normal things that come along with addiction. All of these were presenting themselves along the way. But I, once again, was looking for the excuse of like, well, if it's okay for others to do it, then it must be okay for me. Not paying attention to, hey, man, it's not okay for you. And so when I made the shift years later into comedy in 2006, when I made the shift from ministry into the entertainment industry, God had been putting that on my heart for several years. Because the way that I minister and the way that I would preach messages was always story-based and comedic-based. So there's always this comedic approach, and I would use storytelling to do it. And but by that time, the screws were so loose on this area of my life concerning alcohol that it wouldn't take hardly anything to start really getting me off course. And so that was in that shift. God did lead me to leave that part of the ministry. Now, I don't believe I've ever left ministry because I still work with churches. At the time, we're working with churches. My whole point of being in the entertainment industry was, as a youth pastor, I would see such a negative spirit and a negative message released through entertainment industry that I would get bitter, and I was kind of like, and I'd be preaching at my kids, but mad at them for listening to 50 Cent, and the first time Britney Spears was around, I would see it immediately rise up in my youth ministry. I'm like, they're doing this because they're doing this on TV. And so God finally just checked my heart. And he was like, Elijah, shut up, man. You don't do anything to better this. What all you do is complain about what they do. So if you're not providing an answer, some sort of positive thing to this, then you're not given permission. And this is for me, that you're not given the permission to complain about anything you're not willing to help try fix and try to resolve. And through that, it became like, well, how do I fix the entertainment industry? How do I influence that? And what I knew to do from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, it wasn't wired for entertainment at the time, is I know how to pray. I think the things that aggravate us the most are often indicators of that which we're called to fix. And so how do we eat that elephant? We do it one bite at a time. And so you look at what you can do, and what I can do is I pray. And so prayer would lead me to the next step, to the next step, to the next step, which eventually led me to open mic nights at the Looney Bin Comedy Club in Oklahoma City, and then winning Oklahoma's Top Comic in 2007, and then getting a comedy special, presents special, and all the stuff that God would favor me with, both God and man, but I had to work on my skill and my craft. But overall that time, there was this underlying thing of I'm secretly abusing alcohol. I'm secretly doing this thing. Anytime something's a secret, it's shady, and we don't have to pray about it. We don't have to fast about it. Right. We just got to know something's not pure here.
I'm curious, a couple things. One is that, so you went from ministry into the entertainment field. So was that easier for you to justify your addiction, or to justify, because in the entertainment industry, alcohol is a pretty standard procedure. That's not even considered, whenever you're in ministry, there comes a point it's like, you're drinking a little bit too much, or you've got to keep it more secret. But in the entertainment industry, it's pretty accepted. Was that your experience, or what? Or when did you start realizing, there's a problem here?
So it was acceptable in the entertainment industry for a normal, quotation marks here, drinker, someone who is controlling their drinking. First time you get up on stage and you got 15 minutes to fill, and you're slurring the whole time, and people have paid $15 a pop and gotten babysitters, and they're in on it. They're in the night for $70, and then you get up on stage and slur. The comedy club owner is not impressed with you. They're not tolerant of you. I would say that I had more correction in the unchurched world than I did in the church world. And it could be because I felt looser, because that mindset that you just spoke on, that kind of like, hey, I'm in a club, I'm actually up here telling them about the drink specials. Of course I can drink in here, where they're expecting you. We hired you for a job. If you can't do that job, you're not going to get hired anymore. And so I kind of like, I would abuse it at first. And then, so I was more secretive of it. I was more controlled in when I would do it inside the church world, because I didn't want them to smell it on my breath. I didn't want them to, and no matter what, let me just say this. If you're out there doing that, people know already. They know. Anyone who's ever struggled with an issue knows what secrecy looks like. They know what backpedaling looks like. They know what all this stuff, they know what the extra mints and the Listerine and all that stuff, they already know. Yeah. And so you may be lying to yourself. And so I would do that. And so I would say it was a little more controlled in the outcome, in the manifestation, the outward appearance of it, if you would catch me at a church service or something like that. But yeah, and also I was so convicted whenever I started doing open mics, because what I realized is that for 15 years up to that point, I had been preaching the most important message in the universe. And that's the gospel of Jesus Christ. When I got into comedy, I realized that these guys were getting up for 3 to 5 minutes, and they were only looking for a laugh, and they were taking their presentation far more serious than I'd ever seen almost any of my pastor friends take the presentation of the gospel.
Wow.
And it convicted me, and it made me feel like, you know what? I'm going to tighten up the screws, because I'm still going into churches, and I want the amount of excellence that these guys are going for. I want that to show in my presentation when it's for the kingdom of heaven, not just for a laugh.
So when did you meet your wife, and when did you have kids? Was that while you were in the ministry, or was that after you got into the entertainment industry?
Yeah, no, actually, we met in high school. So in my 11th grade year is when her and I started dating. She went to college, and then I was working the radio industry during that time. And so it was in my second year of actually serving Christ. So I guess I was 22 that we started dating again, and then ended up marrying. And so she was along for the journey until 2010.
Okay.
And I think it was around the same time there, but yeah.
So how did that? How many
kind of
kids? I'm sorry. How many
3
kids did you have during that? So while you were a youth pastor, did you have? Is that where you had all 3 of your kids, or not?
Yeah, 2 of them. So we had my oldest daughter, and then 2 miscarriages in between my oldest daughter and my son. And so 7 years later, there was my son Evan, and then 2 years later, a year and a half later, was my youngest Layla.
So you were in the entertainment business when you got divorced, then, correct? Right.
Yeah.
So would you say that, whenever you would consider yourself having an alcohol problem, and maybe, again, I'm asking you this question because I didn't perceive it. So you were, at some point you realized that you were being excessive in your alcohol use, you were keeping it a secret or whatever. And so your kids are around. Do you think that your kids recognize that dad's got a problem with alcohol, or did you keep that a secret from them pretty good?
Oh yeah, no. When it came to the kids, I mean, though I would try to, I was pretty open about what was going on, and certainly I would term it as an addiction. Now I know I introduced it as an issue, because it began with an abusive relationship with alcohol. It began as this isn't healthy, to the point where I am strongly convinced that it is an addiction if I allow myself to operate in it. And the difference is that there's an allergy that I have toward it, and the allergy shows up in the way of I love Mexican food. Okay, I love it. I mean, I can't get enough Mexican food, but I have never eaten so much Mexican food that I would make myself throw up. Pardon my analogy, but I would make myself sick and throw up so that way I could eat more Mexican food. Now, I have done that with alcohol. I have drank so much that I've gotten so sick that I have just wanted to vomit, not so I could get away from alcohol, but so I could drink more alcohol. And
Wow.
That allergy is very unique to addicts, to someone who has that within them. It's a very specific thing. I'm someone who will leave medication or pain pills. I'll leave them in the bottle. All roads of misbehavior lead to alcohol for me. And so I know that is the area where the enemy would have the most control over my life and the biggest weapon in my life if I allowed him to. And the way I don't allow him to is I work an active program of a daily living program where I'm accountable to other people. I'm accountable to and I have a daily inventory. And so if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And you're speaking some recovery language now. So, you call it an allergy, but it's an addiction. And, some people believe that it's a learned addiction. Some people believe that, it's a genetic, or it's it's just who you are. And that's okay. It doesn't matter to me which one you believe. But my question is when did it become such a problem that you realize, we always say, so in Celebrate Recovery that I attend, principle 1, which is step 1 of AA, is that realize that I am not God. I admit that I am powerless to control my addiction or my tendency to do the wrong thing, and that my life is unmanageable. When did Elijah When did you realize that, man, you can't manage this? This is a problem that you need help. When did that happen?
Yeah, so I would dip my toes over the years into different recovery rooms, and that's kind of the term we use for different alcohol, AA rooms, those kind of that kind of. And so I dip my toes into there, knowing I'd gone too far the weekend before. I have horrible feeling, the shakes, the sweats, all the stuff. I don't want to live like this anymore. It was making itself very clear to me, no matter how much I would try to avoid it. So I was doing that for a few years, and I would scratch together, seasons of time, 6 months, a year here, that kind of thing. That would be significant in a quote unquote normal drinker's life, a social drinker's life. And I'd be like, oh man, you hadn't drank in a year. You should be proud of yourself. But always in the back of my mind, I was planning my escape. I was thinking, well, maybe since I haven't drank in a year, I've proven to myself that I can control my drinking, and all the shenanigans that I personally tell myself, if I allow myself to tell myself lies. And so in 2015, I was on the road, and I was doing pretty well, but I was having this heart issue. I was having this something didn't feel quite right on the inside of me. I couldn't figure out what it was. And so I told my kids, hey, listen, if I'm still having this feeling, shortness of breath, then I'm going to take myself after church to the ER, and I'm going to have them look at me, because type 1 diabetic since I was 4 years old. So I need to watch out for these kind of things. I get there, every report that they do an EKG, and they're like, it's a little off, but we wouldn't say you're too young. You look like you're in shape. I eat right. I eat healthy and all this stuff. And they said, it's probably nothing, but let's just keep you over for another test. The next test would indicate something's not quite right here. And that was the week of Thanksgiving. And they ended up keeping me in the hospital, because by the time they did an angioplasty on me, where they run a camera up through your arteries, they realized, you need to have heart surgery. And it ended up being just the result of type 1 diabetes on my body for, at that time, over 40 years, that my arteries were just starting, my veins were just starting to close in. And so they needed to do a quadruple bypass on me. And it was at that point that I had to sign a bunch of papers over, before, because if it goes wrong, you're not coming back. And they told me later on that this one, I had a 20% chance of making it through. So it was a pretty bad circumstance. And so they were trying to get me to sign the papers. And so I signed, if something happens, that my parents would get custody of my kids, all this stuff that causes you, whether you like it or not, it causes you to really take inventory of where you really are, not where you perceive yourself to become, but where you really actually are. And as a result of that, when I woke back up, because I knew I was either going to wake up in God's presence or in the presence of a bunch of people, And so when I woke back up, I just determined within myself, that's it, man. Tighten up the screws. You can't expedite. There's no reason for you to be expediting the process in getting to the finish line. I mean, the common denominator with all of us, none of us are getting out of this thing alive. so we have a choice to make of how we are going to be while we are here. And I got tired of it. And so that was really the thing. It wasn't a crash and burn, I've lost everything. It is, are you willing to give everything away that you've worked so hard to raise these kids? You've worked so hard to earn credibility. You've worked all this stuff, and is it really a good reflection of your relationship with God? I had to be honest with myself.
So do you mind giving out how long you've been sober or not?
Yeah, that was December 1st, 2015.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. So you mentioned being sober for 8 years, so since 2015. So was there any scripture, any Bible verses or anything like that meant a lot to you during that time period when you were getting sober, or whenever you in recovery? Is there anything that stood out to you, any verses, any scripture?
Yeah. Romans 12:2 is pretty much it is my go-to. What it states is, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So that way you can prove what is the good and the acceptable and the perfect will of God. And so if I'm still this year thinking exactly in every area like I was this time last year, then I have not transformed by the renewing of my mind. I haven't stretched, I haven't grown, I haven't gone through the growing pains of embracing new mindsets that'll cause me to be a bigger person here on this earth. And so that's really what I lean on. If I want to see God's good, acceptable, and perfect will play out in my life, I have to not conform and I have to transform by the way that I change my thinking.
So last question. So if someone is listening and they can relate to your story, maybe they've were raised, they've got good relationship with their parents and their siblings, and maybe they don't really have any reason for some of the decisions that they've made. Maybe they've recognized that there's some issues in their life, and it could be drugs, alcohol, it could be pornography, it could be it could be anger, it could be all kinds of things, but maybe they recognize something. So what message would you give to that person that says, I really relate to Elijah's story? Where would you advise them to go? What would you advise them to do?
Yeah, I would say this: stop comparing your story, and this I'm talking to the person listening. Stop comparing your story to the worst story of somebody else's. It would be a ridiculous thing to think that we have to have these horrible backgrounds in order to pursue change that we feel like is needed. I'm here to tell you, you can be working in ministry and need change. You can be a good parent and still on the inside feel like you need change in an area. You can be doing all these other things, but it's the inward witness of the Holy Spirit that is leading you, guiding you, and directing you toward a betterment in an area of your life. And you don't have to apologize, and you don't have to explain that away to anyone. You can just pursue betterment in that area.
Amen. Well, let me ask you this as we close up here. What is God doing in your life? What's going on in Elijah's life right now? And feel free. I know you've got a podcast if you'd like to tell us a little bit about that. But what's going on in your world right now?
I just released a book 2 weeks ago. It's out and it's called Detours Don't Change Destinations. If you guys want to look that up and pull that up, that'd be great. And so there's that. My podcast is called Laugh Anyway, and I appreciate you having me on.
Elijah, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and you feel empty inside, even though you have everything you ever wanted, that emptiness is a God-shaped void that can only be filled by Jesus Christ. Maybe you can relate to Elijah's story and you have some secrets that have proven to be destructive in your life. God can heal your life and bring positive change to your life. However, if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time.